happened to see those pictures they sent us back from Mars. Kind of made you hate you paid your income tax. I looked at them, one paper had nerve enough to say they were very revealing. I looked at all of those Mars shots and I tried to figure it out. It was nothing but just a picture with a little bit of white and a whole lot of black. They could have filmed that over South Africa.
Before I met King and them, I was John Wayne. I thought if I was right and you was wrong, I had a right to get my gun and challenge you. I didn't understand what being lovable was. I never thought I would see the day that I would be sitting in the church for the funeral for the 3 children in Birmingham, and when King say pray.
Before his death at age 84 in 2017, the legendary comedian and activist revealed shocking truths about his life. Stories of debts, loss, and a failed diet business that dragged him into years of lawsuits.
In 1960, you go to the health food store and tell how many African Americans you see coming in. Black folks would come up, well, how come you don't eat steak? Because cows don't eat steak. The meat you eat don't eat meat.
Once a respected activist and comedian, he struggled with mounting bills, court battles, and public controversy. He questioned the official accounts of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King's assassinations. From politics to health to controversial beliefs, his last confession forced people to look at him in a whole new way.
So we have to stop getting mad and upset because the same system that's killing us refuse to tell us the truth. You have to use your own God-given intelligence.
Let's get into details.
Gregory was one of the greatest political comedians to ever live.
When most people remember Dick Gregory, they picture a black man with a microphone in hand, making audiences laugh while also forcing them to think about race, injustice, and America's deepest wounds. But by the late 1980s and early 1990s, Gregory wasn't just known for his biting humor or civil rights activism. He was known for being broke. By 1990, the reality of his financial life came crashing down in federal court. Gregory openly admitted that he could not repay a $105,000 loan that had been sitting unresolved since 1979. The debt wasn't just about one loan, it was a symptom of much larger troubles. Gregory told the court that he was carrying more than $1 million in liabilities. That $1 million wasn't a single debt, it was a web. Gregory owed back taxes to the IRS, money to American Express, outstanding balances to banks, and obligations to friends who had trusted him with personal loans. A bad financial habit for someone who was a great thinker and idealist. But at the height of his career, Gregory had earned millions. He had played the Playboy Club in Chicago, performed on national television, and filled auditoriums. But decades later, those profits had slipped away, buried under activism expenses, family responsibilities. He had 11 children and risky business ventures. For Gregory, the tipping point came with the foreclosure of his Massachusetts property. In July 1991, Citizens Trust Bank of Georgia foreclosed on his 40-acre farm in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The property wasn't just land, it was a statement of success. It included a 12-room lakeside home where his family lived. Gregory owed more than $250,000 across 2 mortgages. The bank moved in, and the property was taken. For a while, Gregory negotiated a leaseback deal, which allowed his family to remain inside the home. But by April 1992, that deal collapsed. The bank rejected further arrangements, and the Gregory family was evicted from the house. The foreclosure and eviction were devastating, not just financially, but symbolically. A man who had once run for president, who had been on magazine covers, who had marched in Birmingham and Washington, was now being forced out of his home like thousands of ordinary Americans during a financial collapse. But how did Gregory's finances spiral to this point? Part of the answer lies in his attempt to turn his passion for health into profit.
Dick Gregory for the Bahamian diet.
The problem is you're overweight, whether it's 10 pounds or 150 pounds. Hey, I've been there, and the solution is simple, the Bahamian diet. mix it with fruit juice, drink it for breakfast and lunch, eat a well-balanced meal for dinner.
In the 1980s, Gregory developed a powdered diet formula called the Slim Safe Bahamian Diet. It was supposed to combine his message of wellness, vegetarianism, and fasting with America's booming interest in diet products. But behind the scenes, the venture was bleeding money. Manufacturing, marketing, and distribution costs mounted. Worse, Gregory entered into a licensing agreement in 1987 with Correction Connection, Inc., CCI. By 1988, the deal had soured. Gregory sued CCI, accusing them of fraud, breach of contract, and withholding royalties. Instead of the lawsuit rescuing him, it turned into another weight around his neck. A judge ruled that Gregory himself had violated a preliminary injunction related to the case. The court held him in contempt. The penalty was crushing as sales of his diet powder were restricted, and a daily monetary fine was imposed for violations. What Gregory had hoped would be his financial salvation instead became another legal and financial nightmare. By the early 1990s, Gregory's life looked eerily similar to another comedian who had risen to fame in the same era, Red Fox. Fox, best known for his role in Sanford and Son, also lost nearly everything to the IRS, declaring bankruptcy in the late 1980s. Like Fox, Gregory had once earned big money in entertainment, but had not shielded himself from taxes, lawsuits, or poor investments. Both men ended up with the IRS at their door, stripping away assets and forcing them to start over in their later years. Not only that, Gregory himself admitted that part of his financial downfall was tied to his activism. Unlike other entertainers who saved or reinvested, Gregory poured money into causes, funding marches, paying for travel, bailing activists out of jail, and financing hunger strikes that sidelined his career. His family life also demanded resources as he had 11 children, plus the costs of maintaining a household, all of which left little room for long-term savings. Still, the foreclosure and eviction of 1991 to 1992 marked one of the lowest points in his life. Newspapers reported that his 12-room house was emptied, his farm was lost, and his debts only continued to grow. Gregory himself described the period as being choked by debts on all sides. The lawsuits continued. The contempt ruling from the diet business case meant his reputation in business circles was damaged. The IRS continued to pursue him, with reports suggesting that liens and garnishments were used to extract what little income he had. For a man who once joked on stage about money and politics, the reality of standing in courtrooms defending himself against creditors was no laughing matter. By the time the dust settled in the mid-1990s, Gregory was a man with no home of his own, limited income, and a reputation more tied to financial collapse than comedy or activism. His struggles were widely reported, making him another cautionary tale in the entertainment industry. Gregory was living proof that fame and activism did not guarantee financial security. And there were chatters. The public began asking, how could a man who had marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr., debated U.S. presidents, and inspired millions, now be fighting banks, the IRS, and failed business partners? The answer was complicated. Part personal decisions, part activism, part business missteps, and part bad luck. But one fact was undeniable. Dick Gregory's financial collapse was one of the most dramatic falls in modern entertainment history. And this was only one side of his story. Because while the courts were seizing his property, Gregory was still standing on stages, still speaking into microphones, still fasting and protesting. He was broke, yes, but he was far from silent.
Now, I ran from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to dramatize that there's a need to feed hungry people.
To understand why Dick Gregory's financial collapse was so dramatic, you have to understand the other side of his life, which was the activism that often took priority over his career and income. Gregory wasn't just a comedian who told jokes about segregation. He was a man who put his body on the line. His activism began to gain national attention in the early 1960s, when he used his rising fame as a stand-up comedian to push into the heart of the civil rights movement. In 1963, he went to Birmingham, Alabama, a city that had already become a flashpoint in the struggle against segregation. That year, while participating in demonstrations, Gregory was arrested and jailed. The arrest itself was not unusual. Hundreds of civil rights protesters were being arrested in Birmingham. What stood out was what happened inside the jail. Gregory was brutally beaten while in custody. Accounts describe police officers targeting him because of his visibility as a public figure, a black entertainer who dared to bring his fame into the fight for racial justice. This incident set the tone for the decades that followed. Gregory was not an activist from the sidelines. He was willing to be jailed, beaten, and humiliated for causes he believed in. 3 years later, in 1966, Gregory aligned himself with another marginalized group, Native Americans in Washington state. At the time, tribal nations were fighting restrictive laws that limited their traditional fishing rights. Native activists staged what became known as a fish-in, deliberately fishing in defiance of state law. Gregory joined them. He was arrested alongside native fishermen, making headlines as one of the few nationally known figures to stand with indigenous activists in that period. For Gregory, these arrests were not stunts, they were commitments, but they came with costs. Each arrest meant legal fees, time away from paid performances, and the kind of reputation that scared off sponsors and investors. His willingness to tie his career to activism directly shaped his later financial struggles. Yet, Gregory wasn't satisfied with simply getting arrested. He began experimenting with more extreme forms of protest, particularly hunger strikes.
Gregory, do you think this gesture is futile? Do you think it will really bring about what you want?
Well, I think it's putting a lot of pressure down. Just some of the worldwide telegrams that I'm receiving. I guess I've received over 1,500 letters.
One of the earliest came in the 1960s, when he fasted to draw attention to segregation and poverty in black communities. Over time, fasting became Gregory's signature form of protest. He fasted for 6 weeks in support of native fishing rights. He fasted against the Vietnam War. He fasted for women's equality, against police brutality, for Middle East peace, and even in solidarity with celebrities he believed were unfairly targeted, such as Michael Jackson during his legal troubles. Perhaps the most dramatic example came during the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 to 1980. Gregory traveled to Tehran himself at the height of the standoff and undertook a hunger strike to show support for the American hostages. He remained in Iran until his health deteriorated so badly that he weighed under 100 pounds. When he finally returned to the United States, photographs showed a man nearly unrecognizable, frail, gaunt, but still speaking out. His hunger strikes shocked the public, but they also left him with lasting health problems. His body had been weakened by years of self-imposed deprivation. His doctors warned him of the long-term risks, but Gregory often dismissed them, arguing that his sacrifice was worth the attention it brought to causes ignored by the mainstream. All of this activism built Gregory's reputation as someone who was more than a comedian. He became a symbol of conscience. But that role didn't pay bills. His arrests and hunger strikes took him off the comedy stage for weeks, months, even years at a time. Clubs hesitated to book him, unsure if he would even show up or if protests would follow him. Sponsors avoided him, wary of associating their brands with someone so actively charged. To Gregory, this was a fair trade. He often said that his commitment to justice mattered more than his bank account, but the impact on his family was profound. His children grew up watching their father go to jail, starve himself for months, and pour money into movements instead of into savings. His wife, Lillian, managed the household as best as she could, often under extraordinary financial pressure. The tension between Gregory's activism and his finances became clear during interviews later in life. He admitted that his willingness to sacrifice comfort for principle sometimes went too far. He once remarked that when people questioned why his family struggled financially, he answered with a cold analogy. Hitler had a father. Don't talk to me about family. It was his way of saying that history would not judge him by whether he had money or a stable household, but by whether he stood up against injustice. That stance made Gregory a hero to many and controversial to others. His critics argued that he abandoned his responsibilities to his family in pursuit of symbolic acts, but there is supposed to be balance for a smart mouth such as himself. His supporters countered that few public figures of his stature were willing to make such personal sacrifices. The record is clear. Gregory's activism cost him dearly in financial terms. Each arrest meant fines and legal fees. Each hunger strike meant weeks without paid work. Each trip to a protest site meant travel costs, often paid out of his own pocket. And each confrontation with the state, from Birmingham to Washington to Tehran, meant new enemies in political and business circles. But to Gregory, the costs were worth it. He believed his activism kept issues alive in the national conversation, forcing Americans to confront uncomfortable truths. His arrest in Birmingham highlighted police brutality. His arrest with Native Americans brought attention to treaty rights. His hunger strikes drew global headlines, reminding the world of struggles often ignored. Now, in 1967, Gregory shocked Chicago when he announced his candidacy for mayor of Chicago. The race was symbolic. He knew he would not win, but Gregory used it as a platform to highlight issues ignored by mainstream politicians. He campaigned on civil rights, poverty, and police brutality, issues that were hitting Chicago's black communities hard. Gregory's campaign wasn't conventional. He treated it as both a political statement and performance art. His presence on the ballot sent a message. Black voices and protest movements could not be sidelined. 1 year later, Gregory went even bigger. He announced his candidacy for President of the United States as a write-in candidate for the Freedom and Peace Party. He toured the country delivering fiery speeches, often blending satire with sharp political commentary. Gregory was a master of turning jokes into weapons. He ridiculed both Democrats and Republicans for ignoring poverty and systemic racism.
A lot of newsmen asking me strange questions. Like, for instance, Mr. Gregory, if you were elected president of the United States, what's the first thing you would do? I thought the whole world knew if I was elected president of this country, the first thing I'd do is paint the White House black.
But one of his most provocative campaign stunts drew national attention. Gregory printed novelty $1 bills with his face on them, designed to look almost identical to legal currency. The bills became a sensation. Supporters treated them as souvenirs, and some even tried to spend them. The federal government did not find it amusing. Authorities seized the fake bills, claiming they violated counterfeiting laws. To Gregory, this was proof of hypocrisy. He argued that the government cared more about novelty bills than about the real poverty devastating American families. As his political runs faded, Gregory became known for another defining trait, and this was his relentless skepticism. He questioned official stories and challenged narratives which the media and government presented. He repeatedly voiced doubts about the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Gregory argued that the official accounts were incomplete, if not deliberately false. He suggested there were deeper forces at work, and he spent years researching and speaking on these theories. In the 1970s and 80s, Gregory expanded his skepticism. He suggested the 1969 moon landing was faked, claiming the US staged it to win the space race against the Soviet Union. While NASA celebrated the achievement, Gregory insisted it was a government production. After 2001, he openly criticized the accepted narrative of 9/11. Gregory suggested that evidence didn't add up and that Americans were being misled. His views aligned him with conspiracy theorists worldwide, but he defended them as an extension of his activism, which was centered around questioning power, even when unpopular. Gregory's skepticism wasn't limited to politics. It extended into pop culture. When actor Don Cheadle portrayed jazz legend Miles Davis, Gregory criticized the depiction, arguing that it misrepresented Davis's legacy. He also targeted comedy that disrespected icons like Rosa Parks. Gregory believed that joking about Parks' role in the civil rights movement diminished her sacrifices. He would scold comedians and entertainers who, in his words, mocked the struggle. These outspoken beliefs made Gregory both admired and controversial. To some, he was a truth-teller, unafraid to challenge any narrative. To others, he had crossed into the realm of fringe conspiracy theories. Even when critics dismissed him, Gregory never backed down. He often said that his job was not to comfort people, but to wake them up. His campaigns and his skepticism followed the same principle. Never trust authority without questioning it. His political runs showed how activism could break into electoral politics, even if not victorious. His conspiracy theories kept him in headlines and ensured he remained a provocative voice until the very end.
African Americans is less than 12% of America's population, and yet as we sit here now, 87% of everybody on kidney dialysis machines is black folks. There's something wrong with that number.
Also, by the early 1970s, Dick Gregory was no longer just a comedian or even just a civil rights activist interested in politics. He took it further when he decided he was beginning to reinvent himself as something else entirely, a health and nutrition advocate. Gregory often told audiences that the greatest form of protest was not just marching, but living in a way that defied the systems that oppressed you. For him, that meant rejecting the processed, chemical-filled food that dominated American diets. He gave up meat, stopped drinking alcohol, and began long periods of fasting. Some of his fasts lasted weeks at a time, sustained only by water or fruit juice. To Gregory, fasting wasn't starvation, it was discipline. He argued that fasting could cleanse the body, sharpen the mind, and even heal disease. This was radical in the 1970s and 80s, when few public figures talked about plant-based eating. But Gregory saw a direct link between diet and oppression for him. Poor nutrition kept people weak, dependent, and unable to resist systemic injustice. His message resonated in black communities that were disproportionately affected by diet-related illnesses like hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. In 1984, Gregory tried to turn this philosophy into a business. He launched the Slim Safe Bahamian Diet, a powdered drink formula marketed as a natural way to lose weight. The product tapped into America's booming diet industry. Companies like SlimFast were already making millions, and Gregory believed his product could compete. Unlike others, he claimed Slim Safe was rooted in natural, holistic principles. He even linked it to the Bahamas, playing on the idea of exotic, pure ingredients. Gregory's marketing approach was unconventional. Instead of flashy ads, he promoted the diet through lectures, interviews, and his own reputation as a man of discipline. He framed it not just as a product, but as part of a larger movement for health freedom. At first, there was promise. Some consumers swore by the drink, and Gregory's presence on the lecture circuit helped build buzz. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. In 1987, Gregory entered into a licensing deal with a company called Correction Connection Incorporated, CCI, to distribute Slim Safe. Almost immediately, the partnership soured. Gregory accused CCI of fraud, breach of contract, and failing to pay him royalties. Instead of finding financial stability, Gregory found himself trapped in legal battles. Courts issued an injunction restricting how Slim Safe could be marketed and sold. When Gregory allegedly violated those restrictions, he was found in contempt of court. The penalties were severe, as there were daily fines for every violation and restrictions that crippled the product's growth. What was supposed to be his big financial breakthrough turned into another disaster. By the early 1990s, Slim Safe was no longer being praised in the press. It was being called a financial calamity. For Gregory, who was already drowning in IRS debts and unpaid loans, the failure of Slim Safe was devastating. Even though the business failed, Gregory never abandoned his health mission. He doubled down on spreading his message through books, speeches, and appearances. His writings on nutrition mixed scientific arguments with moral ones. He argued that eating meat was not just unhealthy, but spiritually destructive. He also pushed vegetarianism and later veganism long before they became mainstream. For Gregory, diet was tied to liberation. He told audiences that the same system that poisoned their food also poisoned their minds. To resist one, you had to resist both. Gregory's health message was deeply personal too. He would often remind people of his own extreme practices. Some of his hunger strikes lasted as long as 6 weeks. Doctors warned he was risking his life, but Gregory said he was proving a point. Discipline could overcome anything, even political crises. And of course, not everyone agreed with Gregory's approach. Some nutritionists criticized his extreme fasting, warning that it encouraged dangerous habits. Others argued that his diet program was poorly designed, lacking scientific backing, and destined to fail in a competitive industry dominated by corporations. But Gregory never wavered. He argued that his critics were tied to the same industries profiting off unhealthy food and pharmaceuticals. He insisted that natural remedies, herbs, and fasting were the real solutions. Even though Slim Safe collapsed, Gregory's ideas left a lasting impact. He became a pioneer of Black veganism and holistic health advocacy. He inspired younger generations to see food as part of political struggle. Activists, wellness coaches, and even celebrities later pointed to Gregory as an early voice for plant-based eating. His books on nutrition continued to circulate, and his lectures were preserved in recordings. Gregory often said that his fight for civil rights and his fight for health were the same. Both are about survival. By the late 1990s, this was all tried when he was diagnosed with lymphoma. Gregory once again rejected conventional medicine. Instead of chemotherapy, he turned to herbs, vitamins, and exercise. Remarkably, he claimed to have achieved remission. His survival reinforced his reputation among followers as a man whose body was proof of his principles. By the late 1990s, Dick Gregory was already decades into his health crusade. He had preached fasting, vegetarianism, and natural remedies as a way of life. But in 1999, he faced the most personal health battle of his life, a diagnosis of lymphoma, a form of cancer that attacks the body's immune system. Doctors recommended conventional treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, and a long clinical regimen. But Gregory flatly rejected it. In his mind, the pharmaceutical industry was just another system profiting from people's suffering. He believed his years of fasting and discipline had prepared him for this challenge. Instead of chemo, Gregory turned to herbs, vitamins, strict exercise, and alternative medicine. He created his own healing plan based on decades of experience preaching nutrition and wellness. Against all odds, Gregory reported that he went into remission. His survival reinforced the belief among his followers that he was living proof of the principles he taught. For Gregory, beating cancer without chemotherapy wasn't just a personal victory, it was a public demonstration that natural healing worked. Gregory's battle with lymphoma wasn't isolated, it was part of his broader mission. For years, he had been one of the loudest voices urging Black communities to rethink their diets. He argued that fast food chains, processed foods, and chemical additives were as dangerous as police brutality or poverty. He wrote books on health and nutrition, some mixing personal testimony with food science and spiritual commentary. He toured the country, giving public lectures about vegetarianism, holistic healing, and wellness. His speeches often tied personal health to social justice, arguing that oppressed people could not be free if they remained physically weak. He called meat eating a trap, sugar a poison, and processed food a slow form of destruction. For Gregory, food was political. choosing vegetables, fruits, and herbs was an act of liberation. Critics accused Gregory of being reckless, rejecting cancer treatment that could have extended his life. Doctors warned that his remission might have been coincidental, not the result of herbs and vitamins. But Gregory stood firm. He told audiences that the same system that ignored racism and poverty could not be trusted to heal disease. His cancer journey became a case study in alternative medicine, debated by doctors, activists, and his supporters. For Gregory, it was never about science alone. It was about belief, discipline, and independence. Gregory lived almost 2 decades after his diagnosis, continuing to tour, lecture, and speak. His survival gave weight to his message. By the 2000s and 2010s, the health movement in Black communities had grown. Veganism, holistic wellness, and detox practices were spreading. Gregory was seen as one of the pioneers of this movement. He proved that his voice, once famous for comedy and civil rights activism, could also shape how generations thought about food and health. Whether people agreed with him or not, his battle with lymphoma without conventional medicine became one of the defining chapters of his life.